is, the source from which all things come, the security blanket for the stars. Understand what black is. It's not a color, it's the basis of all colors. It is not a complexion, it is a reflection of all complexions called human. And out of this blackness, passion flows like a river. Feelings tell the truth.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH-LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everybody. And Harry, good morning to you, our station manager. I've been kind of not in the saddle for the last 4 or 5, actually 7 or 8 weeks, and I've had a number of guests and friends host a show for me. I had our right hip replacement surgery, which is, I guess, a common surgery, Mark and Raymond. I'm sure you guys have many friends that have had this, but I'll tell you, for me, I thought I was the only one on the planet that had the surgery. In terms of I was really going through an existential crisis. In fact, I still am. But make a long story short, I realized I'm just part of humanity, and we're back in the saddle. And we're going to talk today about a book, A Place of Privilege. And Mark Robinson and Raymond Smaltz are with us. Mr. Smaltz has, he puts the third, Raymond Smaltz the third. So I really love the way he kind of keeps the lineage going. I'm a junior myself. And it's a book about privilege. And Ray and Mark attended the Dalton School in New York, in New York City. And Mark is going to kind of give us a brief overview about the Dalton School. But more importantly, or I say just as importantly, regardless of where your education has taken place, we're going to talk about education, its short and long-term effects, and whether I kind of put on some earlier promos, whether education can uplift or capsize you, whether education can uplift or capsize, and whether you've gone to the Dalton School, an exclusive school, or whether you've gone to an HBCU, or whether you've just entered the mainstream of life, some might say the white world. It's life is a learning experience, but we want to kind of focus on This Place of Privilege by Mark and Raymond. It's book's available on Amazon, and just to give you to tease you a little bit, we're going to talk about really, can even a young person, an adolescent for that matter, be prepared to enter these private schools, these places of exclusivity. Also, or some of you might be NFL or college football fanatics and getting ready for the season, but our Black and brown students even exploited for their athletic contributions, not only then, but particularly now. And also, for example, do administrators then and now really want you to succeed. And then just as a general overview, is this the emotional turmoil that is generated in going to these schools? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? And what is that return on the investment? But Mark, kick us off a little bit about the Dalton School for folks that might not be familiar with it. And you could talk about the Choate School if you want also, but we won't go there. You could just mention, we can deal with that's another show.
A little school pride there, Tom.
Well, I was going to wear my hat. I was going to wear but that's another show.
Is it pronounced Choate or Choke? Is it Choke?
I know I'm outnumbered. I know I'm outnumbered because I know I am outnumbered. But believe me, we can run through those lines of obstacles.
Well, I think everybody knows what private schools are. You know, those are schools where you have to put your money up and pay to go to someplace where the facilities are a little bit better, the resources are a little bit better, everything's a little bit better because money's involved. But then beyond the private schools, there are the ultra private schools where things aren't a little bit better, they're a whole lot better. Where the curriculum and the resources and the facilities are all like a small Ivy League college. And the tuition is equal to that of an Ivy League college. And these are not places for people who can afford a little bit better. These are places for people who can afford the absolute best. And somehow through the miracles of destiny, Ray and I, these, two humble little black boys, ended up in one of those places in the late 1960s. And that's the Dalton School. Dalton really is kind of the crown jewel of ultra private schools in New York City.
And again, The Place of Privilege is the name of the book. Amazon.com is available, and I had a chance to read it. And every page kind of brought things in my mind. But let's jump off, because I've been always asked over the last 20, really 2 or 3 decades, about private schools and whether a parent would ask me, should they send their son or daughter there? And the only thing I can say is it really just depends. It depends on your family psychology, the person's personality, your affiliation. So, but can a young person be prepared for entering these types of institutions, Mark and Ray? Particularly at that young age of 14, 15, et cetera.
I was actually, I think I just turned 13 the first year that I entered Dalton. I was actually there in 1968. And so, I mean, you can just imagine what it was like that entire year. As a matter of fact, I remember that summer while I was going to Trinity to kind of prep in the off term for my first year at Dalton, there were riots. I mean, there were riots right outside my window. I lived in the projects in New York City on 122nd Street, Wagner Houses. And so that summer, I'm taking the bus to the West Side to the Trinity School. But at night, I'm not even out. I'm getting home as quick as I can from Trinity, because that evening, stuff was jumping off right out on the street, because of all the turmoil after the murders of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy, so on and so forth. So, I mean, it was a trying year, obviously, for everyone in the United States, but I mean, it just added another layer of pressure and stress to my first foray walking through Dalton's doors.
Mark?
Well, I think that, when you ask about preparing for the experience, the irony is that the school assumes that you need a substantial amount of academic remedial preparation. There's a degree of that's true, because you're making a transition from public school to private school, and the rigor is going to be harder in most cases. So there is an adjustment to be made, but the assumption that the school makes is that it's a tremendous chasm for you. And, and what the school doesn't recognize, doesn't seem to have any sense of awareness of, is the adjustment factor culturally that you need to make. That the environment is so fundamentally different in terms of what the people are like, what their the social rules and dynamics. Middle school and high school is hard enough on any teenage kid, but to bring in this enormous cultural and socioeconomic difference and difference in race just changes all the rules completely.
Yeah, I mean, Mark and I have our family background. Families both come from the Caribbean, so it's like, in the Caribbean, when you're a baby, teach you how to swim. They just drop you in the water and you go for what you know. And that's what it was like for us. We went there with no understanding of what we were up against. Although I did get a sense in that summer going to Trinity. I graduated from PS 96. I'm like the big man on campus, with all the awards and accolades. And I swear, my first week at Trinity, I wanted to cry at the end of the week, because I said, I'm not ready. I'm not ready academically, and I'm not even dealing with the social aspect of it. I was just trying to tread water in preparation for what was going to, happen for me come the fall. So, I mean, Mark and I, I have to say, I attribute all of this to my mother personally, because in her mind, this was what I needed in order to succeed. Okay. I mean, the exposure to white culture, to white society, to the upper crust, I don't know that she knew or even worried about how I was going to transition. All she knew was that this was what I was going to need and my siblings were going to need in order to achieve in this society. And I didn't understand that at that point, at 12, 13 years of age, but later on it sunk in.
Just before we go to the question about athletics and possible exploitation. I was reading Mark and Ray, Chris Connolly, I guess, included a prelude, and I'm not going to read all of it, but he talks about, because I want our listeners and readers to know that this is not just a nostalgic trip. No offense to you guys, dealing with your own particular history, but it really is just, it's not nostalgia, but this is, Chris Connolly writes, place of privilege makes a vital contribution to understanding our troubled present and our challenging past. For today's students and their parents, it's an invaluable guide. That kind of just resonates with me, that because when you read the book, I'm just so amazed with the particularity and the specificity that you remember. I don't remember any of this thing. So I can't, just 9th, 10th, 11th grade, even before. And so the detail is there, but it also transcends your individual stories. And I think people can relate to it, even if they don't even know where New York City is on the map or never even heard of the Dalton School. But when he talks about it understand our troubled present and our challenging past, I want to jump to that before we go to the athletics comment. On what is that? Did that resonate with you? Because it's 2021, Friday, September 10th, and blah, 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 blah. We're not talking about 40, 50 years ago. There seems to be a connection that's really profound from my standpoint.
Absolutely. I think that in order for the book to rise above just two guys, sitting in a bar talking about their past stories and past glories or whatever, the book needs to have context. And so we worked very hard to make sure that context was there of what the world was like for us and for everybody else at the time that we were there, and how have things progressed, or have they progressed in the 50 years since then? In some ways, things have gotten better, and in some ways, they've actually gotten worse. And we try to take an analytical look at that as we talk about our own experiences and how they relate to that.
Yeah, I agree. Looking ahead, when Mark and I were talking about, okay, how are we going to kind of put a closing or finish to the book? It was really important to get the perspective of today's students, which we were able to do, through Zoom session. We spoke to a handful of Black and brown students that had already graduated. And it was uncanny how many of the stories were the same exact stories that
Even
Mark
today.
and I, even today, 50 years in between, and the stories are the same. And so if you are an educator in the private school system and an administrator, if I were you, I'd be ashamed. I'd be ashamed that the level of education and social responsibility has not improved in 50 some odd years. And so I think the book begins to shine a light on a lot of that. I mean, there are plenty of books that you can go around and read regarding private institutions and their worth and what have you. But, Mark and I were able to put that personal spin to it so that it's not just for those of us that attended private school during that period of time. It's for white society, for them to understand that, like, when you do this, when you take underprivileged Black and brown students or whatever from these environments, there is a responsibility you have to have, in terms of their well-being. And that kind of goes to the point that you were asking about, well, is it worth it? Well, at 12, 13 years of age, I didn't have the chance to decide whether it was worth it or not. Right. My mother knew it was worth it. Okay? Yes. But if I were to talk to people today, it is a decision that certainly has to be made between parent and child. They have to ultimately decide that this is worth pursuing, that you're going to put all your effort into that child succeeding. But let's face it, Tom. Not all of us have dedicated parents, right? That either have the time or the wherewithal to make sure that our socialization into these private schools is a positive one. So That's the dilemma.
Yeah, Ray makes a very important point here about our parents and their values and priorities, which, we are tremendously grateful for them instilling those values and priorities in us. But what they said to us and what we heard from students today that we've talked to is exactly the same, which is parents saying to their child, I didn't send you to school to be happy. I sent you to school to get ahead and have a future. And whether you're happy today or not really doesn't matter all that much.
I can see just as you're talking, Mark, I'm glad I wasn't your son or daughter. No, I'm not saying that. I probably would be blessed, but tough love. There is always room for tough love. But Mark and Ray, take me, because you guys are involved even with the destiny of that school even today. And that's what strikes me, that you haven't given up. You may have gone through some tough times. You may be despondent, but you haven't given up about the hopeful modification, transformation, improvement of the enterprise. Talk about that a little bit, your involvement today.
Well, Ray's been involved in the mentoring program for minority students at Dalton, which is, very important. And I have been involved in the annual diversity conference that Dalton hosts every year for about 30 different private schools from around the New York area. So we both found something to re-engage with the school on. And in addition to both of those things, in the past year, since the death of George Floyd, the school has made a number of very public pronouncements about how it's reinvigorating its commitment to being an anti-racist institution. And we think that the school is very well-intentioned, but so far hasn't gotten much right. And so to the degree that we can, we're trying to help them get it right.
Right.
This is a public show, and so the show is going worldwide. And let's be clear that you could be talking about almost every institution in the North American world about getting it right. But what are some of those gaps that you've perceived thus far, Mark? Because I was looking at right after George Floyd, you had all these presidents, college presidents and prep school presidents issue letters. I was reading the letter from my Bucknell president. I was reading the letter from the head at Choate. I was reading the letter from the president of Yale. And it's really remarkable how the public propaganda, I won't say public propaganda, the messaging was kind of quick and swift to kind of whitewash the reality. But there still, as you say, seems to be a gap to go. So what are some of those gaps that you still see that or some of those impediments to really education being beneficial for all?
Well, in our survey with the students, let me take a quick step backwards. So Mark mentioned the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. These events affected the students of Dalton and other schools around the city. It was cataclysmic. I mean, the kids just said, "We have had enough." And with that, they through social media, there was a site that was created where basically the kids just were sounding off on their experiences at Dalton, at Trinity, at Braley, at Spence Chapin, wherever they attended in the New York City area, private school New York City area. And so the ground was rumbling. Okay. I mean, it was the beginning of an earthquake. And so it went from, like a 2 or 3 to literally a 10 when Mark and I were on with a Zoom session with Dalton administration, dozens of students, alumni, so on and so forth. The anger and you could viscerally feel the anger and frustration that these kids had when the host of the meeting said, "Okay, well, do any of you, want to share any of your experiences, to everyone on the Zoom call?" Why, Tom, did they do that? I mean, the floodgates opened, and I know that Mark and I individually were unbelievably moved by those. I mean, the kids were sharing like, I'm in recovery for 30 years, right? From alcoholism and drug addiction. I felt like I was at an AA meeting, okay? And it left that kind of imprint on me. And Mark and I, at the end, we basically said, we got to do something, man. You know, I mean, we got to help these kids because we heard the frustration, we heard the pain, and we said, well, you know, maybe we can become a part of, you know, some task force. And that was what was created. So we are both members of the Dalton Black Alumni Task Force, along with several other Black alumni. And I mean, we've been banging away for the last almost a year now since we formed the group.
And Mark, I just wondered if you, in terms of the gaps, is this any policy gaps? Is it a financial gap? Is it staffing and hiring gap? Is it emotional intelligence training? Is it diversity? What's the
well, there are a lot of issues and problems, but we focused on three in particular. Number one was a lack of transparency and accountability. When bad things happen at the school, when there are incidents, the pattern and practice of the school has been, oh, we'll do something, but it's all confidential. You won't know what we did. You won't know how anybody was held accountable. You just have to take our word for it that we did something. The students say there's no way you can build a relationship of trust if there isn't transparency around accountability. You know, you'll have a teacher that uses racial slurs in a classroom, and the students want to know, how is that teacher being held accountable? You'll have a student who does some kind of act of harassment. You want to know, how is that student being held accountable? And so that's issue number one. Issue number two is that the Black parents all say they have no understanding of what their rights are as parents, that there's no orientation for them to say, what are you entitled to as a parent, as a consumer of our product at the school? So parents are intimidated and afraid of stepping forward because they don't want to risk the privileged education that their children are receiving.
But trust us, we're doing the right thing for you.
Yeah, the school says, trust us, yes. And number three is college counseling. A year after year after year, we hear stories from students who say that the college counselor basically discourages minority students from applying to the best colleges.
Even today.
Even today, it's like, well, there's a state school that'll be just right for you. And there's not, you know, we're not trying to disparage state schools because all of these institutions are fine institutions. But if a student has the ability and the accomplishments and the desire and ambition to go to an Ivy League school, they're being discouraged from doing that by these college counselors. And also when these minority kids go to the school and say, you know, what can you tell me about Howard? What can you tell me about Spelman? They go, oh, don't take those schools seriously. They're not really the kind of schools that Dalton applies to.
And particularly Mark and Ray, you both of you, every word I really resonated with me in the book, but both of you talked about your college counseling experience. Just elaborate on that a little bit, because I really thought, I said, oh, I guess, no, this could not be happening today, but
It's still happening.
Yeah, it's still going on, Tom. And it was one of those things that as we prepared a survey for those students that we were talking to, I mean, they all said the same thing. Every single one of them said the same thing, that their college placement experience at the school, which is a world-renowned private institution in, you know, the biggest city in the country, they're just really poor at it for them. They're poor at it for Black and brown students. And in my particular case, I added the extra layer to this was I was an athlete, playing football and basketball at Dalton for most of my years in high school. And, I was told that I wasn't going to get into any Ivy League school because I already had a vision in my head of where I wanted to go because one of my best friends was attending Princeton. He was 2 years ahead of me. And so that was number one on my list. That's where I wanted to go because he went there. And
that's where you went.
And that's where I ended up going. Yeah. But my advisors said to me, well, I don't see how you're going to get into Princeton or any other school if you don't play sports. And, I had already made up my mind that I wasn't going to play sports because sports for me at Dalton, even though I loved playing, I mean, Tom, I loved playing football. I loved playing basketball. But this was 1973, 74, right? I mean, at that point, I was literally a Black nationalist, So while I was fulfilling some of my athletic, dreams or what have you, I was also seeing the other side of, Black exploitation of sports athletes, sports figures, so on and so forth. And so, it was a duality that I really had a hard time with, And so I had to try my best to compartmentalize when I was on the football field or when I was on the basketball court or when I was back in my community working with young, Black and brown kids. And for me, being told that whereas my mom told me, you can be anything you want to be. You just have to put your mind to it and your energies. This gentleman was telling us, no, I don't think you guys can do this. And so that, don't tell us that we can't do anything because guess what's going to happen?
And Ray, chat a little bit about, because you referenced it, but I want to give you a chance to elaborate a little more on this exploitation factor and whether you think our Black and brown students are still being exploited in terms of athletic cash value.
Well, Mark, if you've had a chance to read the book, Mark did a wonderful job of contrasting what Dalton was like before Black boys were admitted and what it was like after. And one of those, key things was admitting Black boys because they wanted to have competitive sports teams, whether it was the basketball team, the football team, baseball team, whatever it was, soccer. I mean, Dalton would go so far as to recruit kids from Middle Eastern countries, right? Pakistan and Iran. I knew a young boy who was with us. He came, his name was Hussein. He was a really good soccer player. I mean, excellent. But Hussein was like a fish out of water.
Yes.
He had the most difficult time trying to transition from what his family life was to the socialization of Dalton. And so, he didn't make it. He ended up having to leave the school. But others of us, and I in particular, the thing that makes my story a little bit different, I was not recruited at Dalton. I started in 7th grade. And so, no one knew what I could do in 7th grade. But by the time I got to the, middle school, 8th grade, they saw me playing competitively on the 8th grade team. And so that was the beginning of my athletic career. But for me, it was a negative experience. You can talk to some of the other Black and brown brothers from that time, from my teams. It was different for them. But for me, because I chose not to play one year, my sophomore year, it was a negative experience.
So you were harassed for making that conscious decision.
I was castigated and chastised for making that decision, and it affected me for the rest of my term there, the rest of my time there, and it soured me on playing sports in college. And so now, I don't want people to feel sorry for me. I think that I turned out okay. But there was that aspect of athletics that I felt was denied me because it was such a negative experience. And because, in particular, I had an injury that I came into the start of the football season with to my ankle. And Dalton, they did everything to get me ready to play, except make sure that my ankle was healed. And when they thought I was ready and I played in the first game of my sophomore year, I re-aggravated the injury, and that was it for my football season. As a matter of fact, the doctor that was at the football game wanted to know, who gave me permission to play on this ankle.
So Ray, fast forward to today. Do you still, in terms of your landscape, because you worked for HBO and Showtime, and you've been involved with the media and marketing world for, you've been to Las Vegas, you've been to the Super Bowls, you've been to Olympics, you've had friends. Do you still see the factory of the plantation aspect of black athletes being an operative?
There's a lot of conversations with today's athletes, where they were having conversations post George Floyd about each of their particular sports. And on many, many occasions, the guys would talk about trainers trying their best to get them ready before they were ready, and exploiting guys for their vulnerabilities. They would learn about who's vulnerable with this and who's vulnerable with that. And, so that stuff is going on even today. And I think the other thing that has made it an even larger issue for especially Black NFL players was the whole concussion controversy. So with that, they have become very, very leery about how teams treat them, how they are medically looked after, and even their post-careers. The NFL sits down and they have psychological evaluations of these athletes. And believe it or not, and this just happened a few weeks ago, where the NFL had to stop psychoanalyzing ex-athletes, because they had white athletes on one level, on one intellectual level, and Black athletes on another intellectual level. And that affected the payout for those athletes that were looking for money for post-concussion syndrome and help afterwards, with depression and drug addiction and so on and so forth. So you can even play one of the most violent sports in the world, be accoladed for that, and yet at the end you're still somebody looking for. They look at you like you're looking for a handout. Even though you've given up blood, sweat, and tears for them, they consider you looking for a handout. So, I was spared all of that, probably fortunately, but a lot of guys, a lot of athletes weren't.
Yeah. I think another issue, though, in addition to the injury issue that Ray experienced personally back during school and athletes today, is the issue of our voices. You see in the media and even in social media that whole sentiment of just shut up and play. That we are not entitled to have a point of view or a voice about issues of the day. Back in school, Ray wanted to stop playing on a particular season so that he could be a tutor in a neighborhood tutoring program for other minority kids in his neighborhood. And they were like, no, that's not important. You don't need to be doing that. You need to be playing ball for me so that these teams win.
Yeah, I mean, they were telling me, Tom, about, my obligations, to the school. And I looked at them straight in their face. I said, I have an obligation to my community because that's where I live. And I want to give kids a chance to get the education that I'm benefiting from right now. And they couldn't move me off of that. So, that's the way that went.
I just wanted to share with folks in terms of the book Place of Privilege, and it's available on Amazon. Just I'm not going to give away all the stories here because the stories are really, really insightful, gentlemen, and I just want to publicly thank you. But the titles of the chapters I really love as well. Chapter 1 is The Paradox and the Sphinx. I'm not sure who thought of that title, but
it wasn't me.
It wasn't me either. But and then in chapter 3, what we were. Where we were coming from. Let's
actually, Tom, that one I will take credit for, even though Mark is a really accomplished writer. But Look, I love music, and that was the name of a Stevie Wonder album, Where
Yeah.
I'm Coming From.
Mhm.
And that's where I got that title from. And I think it fit because it fit for describing, where Mark grew up in Queens, where I grew up in Harlem. And it was a springboard for, giving people a little bit of background of our family history.
And then chapter 4, 68, 1968, 1969, because for better or for worse, you and I, the three of us, we were younger, but we were still alive during that time. Unfortunately, there are folks that just don't understand what took place in 68 and 69. So just the way you gave that historical perspective, because I'm a history buff, as I'm sure both of you are, and folks just don't stay intact with history. So when I read that chapter, that's worth purchasing the book by itself. Nothing against you guys, and I know that Ray. By the way, I was looking forward to you wearing your hats because all the pictures I looked at you before you had on various hats. So I was really concerned that I didn't have any hats that you
hats and headsets don't go well together. But you're doing a great job with yours.
There you go. You can make it work. And then trends, dating, and adult social experience. Now, Mark, that's really that for any adolescent to kind of read that, because again, we forget. You're 14, 15, 16, 17, and you're just you're looking to mate or to explore mating, and wherever you are on the planet, that's an issue. And for it to be complicated, really significantly complicated in this environment.
If I could interject for a second, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of some of our friends from Dalton started in the lower school. They started in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade or what have you. And they talked about, as we got together, and Mark and his family and my family and the other folks that we're friends, our gang, our Dalton gang, we've talked about in the past what it was like to transition from being, lower school kids, middle school kids to high schoolers, and what social changes there, went down when you go from being a young child to turning into adolescence, and that all those, parents that welcomed you into their homes when you were 10, 11, and 12, well, now you might be looking at their daughter and you weren't quite as welcome anymore,
And I guess Mark had to, when he tried to visit some people, had to be rerouted and rerouted and scrutinized and blood sample, DNA test, et cetera. It's just so insightful. Let's talk about, we have about another 20 minutes or so I want to kind of freelance and brainstorm. And Mark, you've been involved with the advertising community in a variety of ways for a number of years, a few decades. And my question is, does it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but because you've been paid well and have been accomplished in demonstrating the importance of messaging and demonstrating the importance of words and demonstrating the importance of how images impact our behavior, it just stands out to me that, again, given your expertise, and then when you look at a business, an enterprise, an institution such as Dalton School and its reluctance to advertise itself in the way that you'd like to see itself advertised. I wonder what comes to you I mean, if you were head of school, would you be doing things differently? What does it say to you in terms of your profession versus people being able to be all things for all people, and particularly institutions such as private schools?
Well, one of the mantras of my business in advertising and marketing is know your audience.
Mm-hmm.
Understand your audience. You cannot succeed in marketing to somebody if you don't understand what motivates them, what's important to them, where they're coming from. And in a school context, our experience with Dalton and the experiences of Black kids in all of these private schools is the school did not know its audience. The school, for all intents and purposes, we were invisible.
I hear you saying that still is the case today.
Absolutely, it's still the case today.
So it's an intentional disregard of the value then, or is it unconscious, subconscious, just a blindness? Is it a genetic defect? I'm just trying to get a feel for how you analyze this reluctance.
If I don't see you, I don't have to regard you or respect you, and I'm not obligated to you. I can turn it on or off. I can compartmentalize my interactions with you. You know, you are there when it's convenient for me, but you don't exist in permanent, durable reality for me. I don't have to see you if I don't want to see you. That's the reality.
Ray, does that kind of correspond with you as well?
Absolutely. I mean, Mark hit the nail on the head. I mean, when, especially in our association with the school today, you know when you're kind of getting strung along, okay? And our group on many occasions has been strung along by the school, you know, or another barrier is put up in front of us in terms of trying to interact more with them or interact with certain people in the administration, or even try to interact with their board of directors. You know, all of these things were offered to us. All of these things were not gone through. Okay, the follow through has been sketchy, to be kind. And you know, Mark and I attended one of these sessions, school diversity programs, where we were looking at the Dalton curriculum book. You know, looking at all the courses that were offered or what have you. And just to let you know where they see Black history, which is intricately involved with our history, how they deem it, those courses were all electives, okay? None of those courses were part of the regular curriculum.
So not a prerequisite.
And correct. And so you don't have to learn about Black history if you don't really want to, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, Mark and I, like, we don't need to learn more about Black history. We need white students there to learn more about our history. Okay. And so the school and schools like it, I mean, when they marginalize your history, okay, then as far as I'm concerned, they haven't begun to deal with the problem. You know, I mean, Mark said it. They don't see us, right? There was that film that came out. When they see us, well, they still don't see us. And just looking at their curriculum book tells you where they think we belong.
So let's jump then, given our remaining 15 or so minutes, about the phrase emotional turmoil or emotional scars. And I lift it up in the context of there could be a parent as we speak right now who will view this, and or son and daughter thinking about going to a so-called better school. And again, to come back into my first question, is it worth it? My contention is whether you go to an all Black or brown school as a in secondary school, or you could go to an HBCU, or if you get a job and enter the mainstream or the white world, you're going to confront these dynamics once you begin to swim. You might be a minnow, or you might grow to be a shark or a whale, hopefully. But these emotional scars that might be engendered and developed in the adolescent stage, is it worth it in your opinion?
I would come down on the side of yes, it is absolutely worth it. What we got from the experience was of tremendous value to how we took our lives forward. There are things that we learned, both intellectual and academic, and just school of hard knocks. We learned that have definitely been put to good use in our lives. Was it easy? Absolutely not. And could it be made better? Should it be made better? Absolutely. It should be a better experience. But either way, it is worth it for how things turned out, at least for us and for many of our friends and peers in the end. But it really should be better. Ray and I are both boxing fans. And one of my favorite lines is what the referee tells the fighters at the beginning of the match: defend yourself at all times. Well, our advice to minority students: defend yourself at all times. And you may have to defend yourself from the school.
Yeah, you know, Tom, I think the other thing that hits me regarding having gone to Dalton and Princeton is that the relationships that you make in these kinds of institutions can be really long lasting and life changing.
Mhm.
You know, that's the reason why people spend $50,000 a year to send their kids to these schools, because of the kind of people they're going to get exposed to.
Mm.
You know, those relationships, and those are the people that, you know, run our large Fortune 500 companies, or in our governments, or they are Secretary of State, or you know, they run a multinational corporation. And you know, some of those people that are part of it, that are involved with them, they went to Dalton. You know, they went to Choate, they went to Trinity, or they went to Harvard, Yale, whatever. And so that kind of exposure, theoretically, money can't buy.
Hmm.
I mean, even with $50,000 a year in, you know, a tuition, those people that you get exposed to. I mean, one of the very, very first people I met at Dalton and who befriended me was the daughter of the senator, the Republican senator of New York at the time, the late Jacob Javits.
Hmm.
Okay. And so, you know, or Mark and I knew the daughter of the gentleman that was the cat on the television series, Robert Lozier. His daughter Tracy went to school with us. She was a year ahead of us, you know. And so, I mean, Mark is always, you know, quiet about it, you know, but Mark was very good friends with the daughter of Tony Curtis. Okay.
Mhm.
So, I mean, all of these kinds of relationships and
We won't tell his wife, or she probably knows, I guess, Marks.
oh yeah, Laura's good.
Okay, she's good. Okay.
Yeah,
she's gotten over it. Okay, she's gotten over it.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But you know, again, those kinds of exposure, they can go a long way if you're able to, you know, maintain those relationships over the years. You know, Mark has probably done a better job of it than I have, but Mark, you know, convinced me to go to our, Mark, was it our 40th or 45th reunion? Which one was it that I came with you?
I think it was the 45th.
Right. And now, Tom, I hadn't set foot in Dalton in decades,
Mhm.
right? But the guy that they knew back then, I think if I had a quarter for everybody all the white students, my white classmates, that came up to me and said, wow, Ray, you're so different. Well, I was different, Tom, because I didn't talk to any of them, you know,
Hmm.
when I hit high school. But I mean, look, Mark and I, we've got plenty of scars. We've gotten over most of our emotional hangups with the school or what have you. So we can go back and we can reminisce with them, okay? But we can't say the same for recent graduates of Dalton.
Hmm.
And those are the kids, those are the people that we're trying to help through this process right now.
And also, clarify if you would, Ray, but Mark referenced you're involved with the mentorship program. You're mentoring.
Yeah. So Dalton has had a mentoring program involving Black and Brown students for a couple decades now, and I was exposed to it, I think, in 2010. And so it's a one-on-one relationship with one of the students that they kind of pick the student for you to be a mentor for during the school term. And so I started doing that in 2010. Obviously, the pandemic put a damper on all of that kind of stuff. And Dalton was, because of all the turmoil that Dalton was going through, the mentorship program basically kind of fell by the wayside. They were trying to do some Zoom meetings or whatever. But I really enjoyed my experience one-on-one. You know, my mentee and I, you know, we go to Starbucks, we go to dinner, and we just sit and rap. We just sit and talk. You know, how was school? How your parents? What are you learning today? What did you do during the summer? You know, just to give them someone who had been through that experience and can give them some insight if they're having issues at the school and ideas of how to, you know, meet some of the challenges.
We have about 5 more minutes. I just want to ask one question, then give you guys a chance to share how the spirit might be moving you. But Mark and Ray, the school is looking for a headmaster currently. Is that correct?
Yes.
And also they're looking to fill their diversity and inclusion person, or is it's a temporary person?
Correct.
Yeah, there's an interim person in both of those positions.
So is that an opportunity? Because it seems to me that every moment it's a blessing, but also a challenge to kind of, history and her story. We have to be a change agent. We're part of it. You're either going to make history or history is going to be made on us. Are those opportunities that Dalton alums should kind of be more focused upon, or reach out or see if they can be involved or how they can influence?
Absolutely. And that's something that we have actively encouraged in outreach to Dalton alums, and particularly Dalton Black alums, is to say, here's an opportunity to use your voice and your relationship with the school to help it be better, helping them select somebody who would be a good leader for the school.
And Tom, do not discount the advocacy of the Black faculty. Black faculty at these schools, they are looking out for the students and their parents. They very much want to see change. They have put together, in some cases, plans and suggestions for how the school can change and improve. So be it a Black alumni, Black and Brown alumni, or Black and Brown faculty, we can make a difference on a couple of different levels.
Excellent. The way it works, guys, Harry, the station manager, he'll play the music. So what I do is I just push the envelope. We keep on talking, and then like the Apollo, the music and the hook will come, but it will come in like three or 4 minutes. Any kind of closing thoughts or comments or questions or jokes, perhaps, that you might want to share?
Go ahead, Mark.
Gosh, I definitely encourage folks to pick up the book and read it. I think that there's useful insights there. Place of Privilege. You can get it on Amazon or wherever you get your books, and you can find us at placeofprivilege.com online. But our experience is interesting, but not extraordinary. We are not one in a million. There are others just like us. And so our hope and intention was that our book represents our friends, our peers, and all the other Black kids who've been through similar experiences, just like you have, Tom.
Well, we're going to avoid talking about me because that's, but I will make one parting comment, but Ray, just any closing thoughts?
No, listen, I owe a huge debt to Mark because he, myself, and Chris Rose, we got together, some years ago at a P.F. Chang's in Westchester, and we were sitting and eating dinner, and we didn't even got the entrees. We just had appetizers because for the next 3.5 hours, we were just talking about our experiences at Dalton, and that was the genesis for our idea to write the book. And so I owe a huge debt of thanks to Mark and Facebook. Facebook had a huge bearing on it for re-energizing me in my involvement with Dalton.
And Mark, go ahead.
Facebook often gets maligned for all of the things that it does really, really badly. But one of the things that it has done well is bring together minority communities and bring together friends like Ray. So I am equally thankful for that.
Gentlemen, I've avoided talking about my experience, and I got to tell you, I was anxious, and I still am anxious to do this show because my emotional scars. I'm really not. I turned 72 in July. I know I'm still not in touch with them. The trauma. I've deep seated the trauma so much. So reading your book really helped me. But graduated in '67. Was a trustee in the '90s, and am going to get back involved. But yeah, the emotional scar, sometimes it impacts. I was at a meeting a year ago and had a flashback about being at Choate and just had an anxiety attack.
Wow.
I'm in a meeting 3 years ago and had a flashback about Choate, and they had an anxiety attack right then and during the meeting, and so that I was triggered. It was a group with just all white ladies, but basically, but I digress. So that's why I was so glad to do this show, because I think it's so important for folks to realize that you're going to enter the stream of life and just thrive and survive and lean on one another. Gentlemen, that's it. That's the music. That's the hook.
Thank you so much for having us on, Tom.
Thank you for having us, Tom.
Understand what Black is. the source from which all things come. Security blanket for the stars. Understand what black is. It's not a color, it's the basis of all colors. It is not a complexion, it is a reflection of all complexions called human. And out of this blackness, passion flows like a river. Feelings tell the truth. Song and dance and making you laugh are family members.